Hi, I'm Stephen Walsh, and welcome to Fintech Frontiers, where we're exploring the fintech market one company at a time. I'm delighted today to welcome Matthew Nelson, who's CEO and founder of Confidios Labs, which is a tech solution helping businesses to access markets with compliant market passports. Matthew, tell me, what inspired you to focus on digital product passports?
Great. Well, thank you, Stephen. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
My
And
pleasure.
it's an interesting journey that we've been on. And we originally started by looking at solutions for EUDR, the deforestation regulation compliance, and
Right.
other sustainability reporting. But
EUDR, yeah.
under the EUDR regulations, there's some very specific requirements for sharing sensitive information among different supply chain actors.
Yeah.
And we identified a real opportunity to focus on a digital product passport for compliance information containing that sensitive data that is so important to be able to share across supply chain actors.
Oh, okay. Okay. And Matthew, tell me, like for people who are not as expert in this area as you, of which I'm sure there are many, why is this so important? Why? What's the importance of this?
Yeah. So what's really interesting is that uh, so much of the information that's required for this compliance, it does already exist in organizations, and there are industry standards that are out there from FSC and PEFC or Fair Trade and the Rainforest Alliance. Um, but under the deforestation regulations, this information now needs to be shared up extended supply chains and shared with regulators and in a manner that is very different than those industry standard compliance have required. So
Right.
it really comes down to the shareability of this
Mm.
sensitive information
Yeah.
and just how to
Okay.
manage that. That makes it unique.
Right. And for people on the ground or companies that are trying to provide goods into the EU, does this mean that it's getting more difficult, or are they getting shut out from the markets, or how's it
That's
turning up for them?
Yeah, so there's no shortage of challenge from any party in the
Right.
supply chain, from
Yeah.
Europeans all the way out to smallholder farmers in rural
Right.
parts of the world, the far reaches of the
Yeah.
world. There's been enormous pushback by industry
Hmm.
federations and industry bodies, as well as large corporates and national governments.
Right.
Yet at the same time, there's also been a lot of activity and initiatives put in place to help support and verify or certify
Hmm.
local agricultural producers at a national level in order to meet these regulations. So, no
Okay.
shortage of work and
Yeah.
many solutions piling into this space to try and solve some of these really tricky
Right.
problems
Yeah.
of meeting the compliance.
Cool. And I mean, it's refreshing though to hear that that you're out there helping to kind of reduce the friction in the global economy. Because if you tune into the news today, everywhere you're hearing about there's trade restrictions, there's tariffs, there's access being cut off. But I guess it's good to hear that there's people working in the opposite direction to help make it easier for companies to trade and to trade responsibly and
Yeah.
do so more easily, right?
No, indeed, absolutely right. And so we like to think of the solution that we're providing not as one of being a compliance or a reg tech
Hmm.
solution. What we're
Yeah.
doing is enabling the continued access to markets. And like you say,
Market access.
there is
Yeah.
just a, a very dynamic and rapidly changing regulatory environment mixed
Sure.
with trade tariffs and these
Yeah.
issues. And
Hmm.
so where you have to prove that your products are coming from the correct country,
Right.
so you can
Yes.
apply the right tariffs to them. And you mentioned before the companies being shut out. It's absolutely it is a very significant issue. We've heard stories about Ethiopia, where 40% of that country's coffee exports go into the European Union. And
Right.
those exports tailed off significantly in last year out
Mm-hmm.
of fears of EUDR compliance. And there's
Whoa.
a
That
number of
must have made a
stories.
huge impact on an economy like that, so reliant
That's correct.
on that commodity. Yeah.
That's correct. So there are some really significant global trade and market access issues that are raised by these regulations, and um, and so it's a very complex problem, and lots of different solutions are approaching the problem from different perspectives. For
Right.
example, it's important that the geolocation of the plantations or where the crops were produced is made
Yeah.
available. And so you have
Sure.
Earth observation, satellite analytics
Yeah.
companies who are
Mm-hmm.
providing their point solutions
Yeah.
for that deforestation analysis on land, and other kind of ERP solutions and supply chain risk management GRC platforms. So
Right.
many different players trying to solve this very tricky problem.
Yes.
And so within that context, there is the problem of sensitive information access and
Yeah.
continued
Sure.
visibility.
Very commercially sensitive information that needs to be shared nonetheless.
That's right. That's right.
Okay.
Um, Indeed.
And you've got the blockchain for that, right?
We're using a combination of permissioned blockchain as well
Mm-hmm.
as digital identity and self-sovereign identity protocols to compartmentalize and manage the information that's required for compliance. So
Nice.
yes, indeed, we see ourselves as a deep tech solution, and
Mm-hmm.
we're really kind of using some of the latest innovations in self-sovereign identity protocols in order to manage access to this data and keep that access management at a smart contract level, all on
Sure.
chain,
Yeah.
and yet at the same time allow the intermittent update and refresh of some of that evidence that's kept on chain. So it's quite
Nice.
an interesting data management challenge that we're addressing in the context of the larger business processes and workflows that are required.
So Matthew, like really, for your clients using this, it strikes me as, it kind of helping them get access to markets and to get the best price on those markets. Is that correct?
Uh, that is correct. So, just a little background on the deforestation regulations. They apply to 7 different agricultural commodity classes, and
Mhm.
and it they require an enhanced due diligence over the entire chain of custody of these products. So we're talking now about trade finance and insurance that addresses over 110 billion euros per year imports alone into Europe. Now, from the 1st of January in
That's
26,
big.
it's very big indeed. And
We like big problems here on the pod.
And the problems are not just on the operators in Europe that need to comply with these regs, because the burden of proof and the burden of data collection extends all the way out, and it primarily impacts these smallholder farmers and parties all around the world who are the original producers of these products. And we're talking here coffee, cocoa, cattle, soybeans, natural rubber, wood, and
Mm,
timber products. So,
yes.
so it's the seventh one is palm oil. There are millions of farmers worldwide, and
Right.
then there are layers of cooperatives and processors and mills in these supply chains.
Yes.
And that this is where the biggest challenge is for that traceability of the provenance of a product and how it's been kept separate from other unknown origin products through a manufacturing process. So we're really getting into there's a lot of information that is coming from enterprise systems that is going to prove how you segregate your batches and how you process these products. But there's also attestations of compliance and the provision of licenses, permits, indigenous peoples' consent, negotiation information, payroll, and that kind of information to prove that you're complying with local labor laws. So it is a wide and it is a very wide problem and a very big
Yeah.
one.
And like when you're talking about, millions of farmers and people around the world that are part of these supply chains, they're, needing to access this. I'm expecting through, maybe Android handsets, or what, are they, are you thinking of mobile apps then as one of the touch points at that end of
So this is a really, really good question. And so those software companies that are assisting with the data collection and assembly, of course, there are handheld device applications. There's desktop applications, and we're dealing with a lot of paper-based contracts and documentation and permits. So the proving the legality and verifying legality of the underlying data is a huge challenge. There's no easy solution for it. And so what we're doing in that context is we're plugging into global supply chain solutions, track and trace solutions,
right,
and helping them to create a digital product passport. And that
right,
passport
yes,
it contains trusted compliance credentials. So topic by topic, we're creating these credentials, which can be verified, and we're fossilizing them on a permission blockchain.
yes,
And so and then you assemble those trusted compliance credentials into a passport.
yes,
And
yes,
then those passports, you can share those passports, they're interoperable.
yeah.
And
And so
only trusted parties can have access to that data.
right, that's fantastic. So, for maybe a cocoa farmer in Africa, that could mean that they're able to sell their products as a fair trade product into the EU, and they're able to put that truckload onto the spot market and have it sold and taken away and sold at a good price.
Indeed. So our vision is to provide these passports as part of a product shipment that literally enable that enable access to markets. It's as simple as that. It's
Yeah,
less about it's less about specific regulatory compliance. It's really a
yes,
question: if you want to sell your products in European markets, you must have this information assembled
right,
and visible and
yeah,
available for the importers
yeah,
and the regulatory competent authorities who are policing it.
yeah.
Uh,
So, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to kind of build on, you mentioned fair trade, and that's and it's a great example because there are multiple different industry standards, and they've been around for years, and they include FSC and PEFC for paper and wood products, or fair trade for a lot of food products. The challenge is, and a lot of those standards already require proof of segregation, they require legality, but they've never required the sharing of that underlying information.
Right,
Organizations in the supply chain have needed to assemble that information and have an auditor or an assurance provider come in, look at that, audit it against the industry standards, and give them a seal of approval that they pass. And it's that seal of approval, that certificate, that proves to the rest of the world that the product is compliant and those parties are compliant. Under the EU
excellent.
deforestation regulation, they need to make that data visible as well. And that creates therein lies the problem.
Yes.
So,
And it makes a whole lot of sense because, like, at the dawn of blockchains, people had spoken about how relevant this would be to supply chain networks, where there are many different types of stakeholders right across the chain, from from farmers to suppliers to trade finance people to regulators, customs to purchasers, insurers, and that all of them need access to particular types of information. Earlier on in the blockchain history, I think that the blockchain had seemed like something which was a solution without a problem, but now I think we're maturing into a situation where it is very much a solution, and it is serving a very big problem in a very practical way. Is that the way this is that the kind of cutting edge of what you're doing with this now?
And it is really interesting what you've described, and we have seen the adoption of blockchain technologies really shifting in the past few years, but it's encouraging to see not only some of the innovations in layer one solutions and layer two to apply to a commercial environment rather than to just the trading of Bored Apes or tokens. So it is exciting to see the much greater adoption in commercial space. And so what we are doing is we have a very specific point solution for that managed protection of sensitive information over time. And so
super. And Matthew, you mentioned to me earlier that like your primary focus is on this trade supply chain, but that you've also that you're looking at repurposing this for the digital supply chain of services into the banks to DORA. Is that something that's kind of in the product roadmap and down the line? Where is that in the order of things?
Very good question. Without question, the capabilities that we have apply to other situations, like we mentioned the information register information for the DORA compliance. But
yes.
Take, for example, a project financing or syndicated debt facilities. These are situations where it is often well-controlled and well-governed financial reporting that is required to be shared and held there. However, there's also non-financial disclosures. There's also legal contractual information and perhaps even designs and intellectual property trade secret type information, which must be accessed and trusted by multiple parties over a period of time. And we have a novel solution for how to address those problems.
Yeah. So access to the relevant information is done on a kind of access by profile for the different categories, whether it's an insurer, a supplier, a farmer, transport, regulator, whatever.
Indeed. What we're doing is we're applying digital identity and self-sovereign identity protocols to basically to create the identities that hold the private keys with access to the information. And so there's always a combination of multiple identities which has access to certain elements of the information. So based on the way that our contracts are working and the permissioned access is working, you don't need to know who the users are who need to have access to this information in 2 years' time. It's controlled by a combination of a verified user, verified organization, and other verifications that are themselves independently verifiable. So and this whole digital identity is it is a rapidly growing and very important frontier in the digital world. And so we're simply embracing some of the latest tools and techniques in that space to then marry that with our blockchain capabilities to offer this.
Great. So, I mean, we've heard a lot of talk about how, particularly in the EU, has been singled out for criticism that, that there's an excess of regulation, even though a lot of it has got good reasons. Are you, in a way, kind of reducing the complexity of that and articulating it in terms of market access and just making that easier at least? Or how does that work?
Yeah, okay. So, and it's a really important question, especially so for years now, the European Union has been adding layer upon layer of new regulation, and keeping track and keeping up with that regulatory burden is, of course, an extremely challenging business problem. But we're now going into an environment where deregulation in the Americas and pushback on regulations in Europe. So it
Yes.
so regulatory compliance and market access for your products or services is more challenging than ever. So what we're enabling is the compartmentalizing, componentizing compliance evidence so that it's interoperable. So
Yes.
our digital passports, I mentioned that they are created by different topics of trusted compliance credentials.
Yes. Yeah.
Those, when you break down a regulatory obligation into the business controls required to prove that you meet that obligation,
Yeah.
and then you encapsulate that, that can be used multiple times with
Right.
multiple different parties.
Yeah.
And a perfect example, I had mentioned before that legality of commodity production is critical under EUDR, but it's also important under fair trade. So anyone who already has assembled that information for their fair trade compliance can put that into a trusted compliance credential and make it part of an EUDR passport or a fair trade passport. And that's different assemblies of trusted compliance credentials shareable on a permission basis with only those parties that need to see it. So in that sense, creating these interoperable, verifiable credentials with multi-purpose, multi-use. So in that sense, we are seeking to simplify and compliance obligations.
You're assembling a bunch of points of truth, which could be then applied to providing access to different markets as might be required.
That's exactly right.
Great.
And yes,
Super.
and each of those can be audited and approved, verified by multiple different parties. And that process is also visible. So now imagine you're looking at a new set of information and you can see not only the verifiable trusted data that it contains, but also all the parties who have already had a look at it. And so we're talking about layering trust over compliance evidence or any obligation. So legal or regulatory obligations. So think of a commercial obligation where you need to have that trusted evidence as well. Project finance, syndicated debt, or DORA compliance.
Great. So look, I mean, you're obviously addressing a huge problem out there. Just wanted to get an idea of how's that going to turn up now in the marketplace? Who's going to be buying? Who's going to be using this? Or how are you getting it out there? Because I know you're with this particular venture, Matthew. You're towards the earlier part of it. You're kind of getting it ready for market. I know there's a lot of interest out there, but tell me a bit about that side of things, please.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So as you can probably appreciate, this solution is quite a deep tech solution. This is infrastructure, and so we are positioning ourselves not as an off-the-shelf SaaS solution, rather as a plug-in to existing software platforms, which are already processing elements of the compliance evidence. So we're partnering with a global software supply chain track and trace platform so that our digital product passports can be on offer within their product suite. And so that's how we're going to market, is as a plug-in. And so very much looking forward to speaking to any solution platforms in the market who are processing sensitive data and need a novel way to better manage that sensitive information.
Fantastic. And so, Matthew, look, obviously you've got something very compelling here, solving a massive problem out there. For people who are trying to find out more or reach out to you, can you tell me where they should reach you?
Absolutely. So you can find more information at confidios.com, and you can also reach me on LinkedIn. My LinkedIn is Matthew Nelson, and I'd be happy to respond, speak to anyone, and answer any further questions.
Great. So that's confidios.com. Go check it out. All right. Matthew, thank you so much for speaking with me today. I think what you're doing is amazing and it will make a big impact. And I'm delighted to be able to help you get the message out about it here.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it, Stephen.